Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Men. This film is directed by Alex Garland. I've been doing a deep dive into Alex Garland's stuff, but more just the movies that he's directed. And I reviewed Ex Machina as an example recently, and I discussed a lot of my feelings on that film in terms of, I was torn. I talked about how I feel, fascinated by it, and I'm intrigued by it, but I'm not necessarily compelled. Thought-provoking ideas is just not quite there in terms of the cinematic quality and the aesthetic and all of that. I just wanted more. And then Annihilation really pushed in terms of the aesthetic and in terms of just being hypnotic and compelling in terms of a cinematic work. It was way better, way more ambitious. But the problem is that film, even though it pushes in a direction visually, it's also lacking way more in other areas. I felt like the story itself is ill-conceived and it's sloppy and it's silly compared to something more structurally sound like Ex Machina. And now we have his third film, Men, and for once, it's not a sci-fi film. He's actually going into horror. So naturally, I'm intrigued because, perhaps any larger cerebral questions that he's had, he can explore maybe in a different way and kind of maybe settle into them in maybe a more intimate story. Of the three films that he's made, Men is by far the most visually striking and I think the most visually detailed and ambitious. I think he really stepped up his game, really amped up everything in the ways that made it feel almost three-dimensional. It is just more cinematic and there are a lot more poetic images and a lot of stray abstractions, but yet they're very haunting. But there is a caveat to that. It's also by far my least favorite of the three films that Alex Garland has directed. Y'all, I really didn't like this film. And it's very perplexing to me because, at least with the other two films, even though I have my problems with them, I still find them engaging enough to where I would watch them multiple times. Even Annihilation, a film I'm not necessarily sure I liked, I would totally watch it multiple times because there's enough there for me that is, I think, titillating. Frustrating it may be, it's still pushing in a direction that I'm interested in, and I think the incentive to explore is certainly there. But this film I really have no desire to watch again, at least right now. Maybe that will change at some point, but I don't know, I just felt like it was the most shallow, the most boring, I don't know, just the most deflated piece of storytelling that I've seen from him. And that's by a long shot. It was actually shocking to me as I was watching it. I was shocked by how I was responding to it. But I will say, not everything about it is bad. There are some things that I did like. One of the things that saved it in any sort of way is absolutely the main actress at the center, Jessie Buckley. I think she is absolutely fabulous. She breathed so much life into this. I don't even really know what to call it. It's not even like a character, merely a generic feminine symbol, that is just there to be a target for misogyny and just there really to be a victim. But I think she's effortless in this film. Really, I think she thought through the character for herself. I think she created a full backstory and it's all very dimensional just in her expressions and in the way that she lights up the screen. I feel like she has filled in a lot of internal blanks that really needed to be filled in. And they're ones that we aren't privy to. And I think that's very important. There are little things that the character says, like, oh, I don't play piano, but she's actually a very good piano player. Little things like that are very confusing, and yet, she makes it all feel very believable and like she has dimension. But all with subtle effect. She's never really asking for much from the audience, and I think that is the sign of a real talent and the sign of a star. And I also like her friend in the film that she talks to via FaceTime, I guess. I think a character like that is very important in a script like this, especially one that is so removed from reality as this one is. You need a character in there to kind of keep that balance, to kind of keep our protagonist rooted in reality in some form. And we have a good one here. She's really like the only character that has any sort of personality, but she's interesting and she's cool and she just seems like a really great friend and the perfect person to help out a girl like this in a situation like this. And so yeah, I was totally into that. And as I said before, the imagery in this is really stunning and it's properly cinematic and it has all this great texture and attention to detail, and just the essence of certain environments is infectious, I think, especially in the opening when she's like exploring the grounds of this place. Those who watch regularly and those who know me know that I have a weakness for walking in the woods, wandering in nature. So, of course, all of this really spoke to me. It really just It felt enchanting, and that's not a word that I use very often, but truly it had a mystical quality about it. The emerald colors just pop almost with like a psychedelic sort of flair, like the moss and the leaves and everything. It's otherworldly. And I also like the tones, or like, the echoes of her voice and how they kind of add that into the score. It has a quality to it that is very similar to like Ligeti or Penderecki. There are no words, and yet there is a subtle movement of tension that you can feel. And that, I think, is very engaging. I loved the atmosphere of it right away, but that's it, really. I mean, once that scene was over, there was almost nothing left in it that I felt any sort of tension or any sort of excitement to keep going in the story. Again, there are lovely shots that, when I was really actively paying attention, I thought, well, that's a cool abstraction just as a basic idea, a stray idea, but none of it amounts to anything, at least as far as I'm concerned. And therefore, it just felt, as a work, completely meaningless to me. The problem with this movie for me, and I think this is just something that we see a lot. It's very trendy when it comes to kind of the psychological art house horror that is very popular right now, that is very meta. It is the insistence, I think, on like this academic presentation. There's a lot of recycled images from a lot of postmodern films, a lot of, like experimental art house horror from the 60s and the 70s. But the regurgitated images and the metaphors that, are all in the mind somewhere and you're pulling from them, it feels very much like this is the binding for the film. And for me, that's just not enough. All we have here are just images with like a very shallow story that feels kind of like it was thought of last minute, and it's stringing all of it together. And it does feel, I think, very slapped together, not from a visual standpoint, but just from a structural standpoint. But I would like to just kind of focus on the story sometimes and allow any sort of metaphors that exist, whether you are conscious of them as the creator or not, they kind of just formulate themselves, and then we get to kind of decode them or decide what it means to us, rather than you kind of shouting it at us. Then suddenly it's engaging, and I feel like, oh, like I want to be brought into this world, this environment where there are real stakes and there are real emotions, and there's just something more dense than just this very paint by the numbers thesis that we have here. Yes, the thesis seems to be just like men, am I right? And even just the title, Men, I swear that's such a bad title. I don't know, like I feel like the plot and just the whole experience and everything is as uninspired, maybe not quite, but almost as uninspired as that title. We have this main character played by Jessie Buckley, and she's a woman who's young and she's trying to move on from the death of her husband, and we come to learn that this relationship she was in was very toxic, and it might have been a suicide. Her husband might have killed himself, and she's going to this country house or this cottage out in the beautiful countryside to get away from everything and settle everything down. And while she's there, she runs into all kinds of different men, and they're all played by the same person, which again, it just felt like a really uninspired metaphor without a lot of inspiration behind it. And she enters this house, and eventually it's going to become basically like a house of mirrors for her that is going to regurgitate any sort of trauma, any bitterness, guilt, anger, pain, etc. that she might feel when it comes to this toxic husband or anybody else. And it's all going to come out in the form of all kinds of Freudian psychedelic images that represent all kinds of different versions of primal dominance. And there is no confrontation here, and there is no revelation here, nothing that isn't explained to us in some sort of lofty metaphor. It lacks anything tangible, and therefore we are not rooted in any sense of tension, as I said, or any of the feelings of fear, paranoia. And you'd think it's a horror film, fear and paranoia should be a big one, but no. I think it would have been so much better if there had been something to break up the monotony of all these different encounters she has with different versions of this male. It would be so much more interesting if not every scene just ends in men suck, poor her. And if you want to just show them as all being assholes, that's fine, but just, I don't know, like maybe you can show different variations of that assholery. I guess Jeffrey is an okay example of this. I would say that he did break up a little bit of the monotony. It all ends in a way that I did not like for that character. But it was like a glimpse of something a little bit more interesting, a little bit more faceted, where you kind of like him. So if he were to say something a little strange, a little off color, it's like, oh, I don't know, should I trust him? I like stuff like that. Somebody like that adds a lot more shade to misogyny, because believe it or not, there can be shade, and not just like big bad wolf kind of stuff. Pretty much any conversation that she has with a man here, there always is like a word or like a hint of something where I'm like, oh, that could be interesting, and then it doesn't go anywhere. Or, you know, something that could be more complex, offer something more complex about the nature of misogyny and the nature of that weird tension between men and women, the bitterness or whatever. And I find, like, you know, the idea of a woman's power very interesting, because it's like, it's a power which is very different from a man's power. So if your power is sex, and especially for this character, how does she feel about that? How does she feel about her power? How does she use it, or how does she not use it? And how do men react to that? And what does she learn about that? What do they learn about it? Those are things that I think could be really cool to talk about. And, you know, I know it's done to death, but the Freudian stuff can always be very interesting. And, you know, you can bring out the Freudian stuff, I think, in a more interesting way, a more concrete way that serves the actual story and is not, you know, just kind of built through some grotesque image that is fully in effect in the third act. As the film is going on, I find myself kind of slowly becoming detached from it. And I kind of zoned out a little bit towards the end, just because I felt like there was just nothing we are building off of. It just got more and more skeletal and more schematic, and there's just no interesting directions to go in. And I feel like for a movie like this, it's so, like I said, paint by the numbers. It's so obvious. Everything is trending so in a very expected direction. It's all so safe. Everything is so carefully measured, and every metaphor is very neatly placed. And it's like, this is horror. Like, come on, like, throw us off, do something interesting, do something unexpected. And in the third act, I mean, just in terms of how it is executed, it's actually pretty well done. It's like this weird Matryoshka doll effect where it's like each man is birthing the next one and the next one, all different versions of ones that she's seen. It's very Freudian with the vaginal imagery. It's like a mix of the masculine and the feminine. And, you know, each time you're shedding a skin or whatever, each time a new man is being birthed here, it's like we're getting closer and closer to the real idea that she really needs to face, or the real man that she needs to face, and that is, you know, her late husband, who, you know, even though we don't get much insight into her feelings about it necessarily, he is at the heart of any sort of paranoia or anything that she can't deal with that is in her past. And of course, the husband is going to be the final doll in the set there, and she's going to have that confrontation. And just, it just felt very on the nose. It's a very half-assed self-actualization for me, and I don't know, I don't get any insight into anything. Again, I don't understand the point. For myself, maybe to other people, they'll have a point for it, but it's like, for me, I didn't understand why this film was made. I don't really understand what they're trying to say, other than just a very, very basic idea. It's like, what is there to gain? And what is there to be gained for her? I think that's the more interesting question. What is it that we understand about men or women, their interactions? Nothing, really, nothing. I really didn't like this, guys. And it's, like I said, it's so baffling, because it's like, it's supposed to be like, there's a lot of grotesque imagery, and yet I didn't squirm once. And it's supposed to be scary, and yet I was more kind of bored the whole time. And I don't know, every single scene just led me down a certain path that was a dead end. One thing I think Alex Garland kind of is not good at is sex in any way. There's no complex eroticism here. And I think this is the perfect place to do it, because it's like, you know, the whole movie is about primal masculine dominance versus femininity. And it's like, yeah, there is maybe a scene or two where you're exploring a little bit of the sexuality, but it left me so cold. I don't feel any of it. But yeah, he's too careful. He needs to get a little rough and a little wild, and yeah, explore the sex and have fun with it. Stop keeping me so distant. I don't know. I guess I'm just really disappointed because, or at least I'm more riled up about this particular film because I like this guy. I do. I think he's very talented, and I think his images and the concepts that he comes up with are really, really awesome. And wouldn't it be fabulous if one day it all comes together and we create something really, really, really great? If the images were built around something really dense and interesting that can take you on a journey that might be a little bit crazy, might be a little bit surprising, and you end up in a place that maybe you didn't expect, but somehow it feels right. Because that, to me, is the precise formula, I think, for creating a good horror film, or just a good film, period. So, yeah, in terms of would I recommend it? No, I wouldn't. I would recommend Ex Machina, and I would recommend even Annihilation. Whether you like it or not, it at least has some tread in the tires. Both those first two films have some tread in the tires, but it's all worn down here. And I don't know, it's all smooth there's nothing to really sink your teeth into, I can't recommend it. But that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website as always. It is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist and I do commissioned portraits, and I also sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I would like to give a shout out to my patrons who are fantastic. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you are interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.